way to the top. These pans have a little slope to the side so that the top diameter is a little larger than the bottom diameter, and so it'll set down into the stand, if you will, the metal flashing cylinder after we get it constructed. And you don't have to be real accurate with this measurement. It's going to change maybe a half an inch or an inch from the top to the bottom. So if you get it a little bit too small, the diameter of the cylinder, then it's just going to mean that the pan's going to set a little higher than it would if you got it a little bit larger diameter. But in order to determine the length of the metal flashing, you need to measure the circumference and then add some distance to that to allow for bending the ends. And we're going to add 2 inches, and I think you'll see a little later why we add so much. So let's get started. I've got 48 inches. I'm measuring this with a fairly flexible tape, like a cloth tape, so that I can get a fairly accurate measure. It's 48 inches, so I'm going to add 2 inches to that. So I'm going to measure out 50 inches, which I've done already, and cut this square and straight and smooth. Now, as mentioned earlier, we want to make sure we're wearing gloves, and we want to be very careful in doing this because not only is the metal sharp when we cut it, but also we're dealing with a pretty sharp knife. Now, this is just a utility knife. This knife comes with, let me see if I can find those blades. I had a package of blades here. Well, what I want to show you actually, here they are. It comes with blades. I think most people know what a utility knife is. They're fairly easy to change out, but when you're cutting metal with one of these, they dull fairly quickly. And you can either change these blades out and buy a lot of blades, or you can take a whetstone, just sharpen them up a little bit each time. Just make sure the point's fairly sharp. The next thing is, after you've measured out the length of your metal flashing, you want to put something straight, like this is just a carpenter square, across it and clamp that down to your table. Now, if your table is something that you don't want to damage the surface, you want to put a piece of wood underneath there so that you don't damage the surface of the table. Clamp it down very securely and take your utility knife, bump it up against your square, and lightly, with not a lot of pressure, make one pass. Now, it's going to take more than that to cut this, and actually we're not going to cut it all the way through. We're going to score it enough to where when we bend it, it'll break. But we make one light pass because my experience has been if you try to do it all at one time, you'll get off your mark. It'll draw one way and it won't be straight. But if you'll make a light pass down through there, you'll score it the first time, and that way any subsequent passes will follow that score that you made initially. So I'm going to put elbow grease now. And I might go one more time just to make sure. And then I'm going to bend it back and forth until it breaks. Now you might ask, why don't you just use a pair of tin snips for that? Well, I have a pair. The way these are made, when you start cutting, it does a pretty good job at first. But as you get on down the line, it's very difficult to cut a real straight line. The other thing is, these are pretty sharp, but they'll dull, and when they do, they bend the edge. It's probably better to use something like this utility knife and get a good straight cut and just break it off.
And the tanks and the trucks and the tractors on the black car load. becomes a part of the soul and part in the mind of a boy who's raised by the railroad line. And the big round penny that you lay on the rails and the wheels smash flat.